Good day, everyone. On behalf of the 14 civil society organizations hosting this media briefing today, Tata Unchoko, Sis Mentane, Sis Antini, I welcome you. My name is Leanne Govinsamy, and I'm an attorney at the Center for Environmental Rights. I'll be facilitating today's briefing. Members of the media, colleagues, we have had to call this media briefing today in order to bring urgent attention to the water access crisis that hundreds of community members are facing across the country. We would like you to understand the gravity of the situation facing people all around the country and understand why we have joined forces to be able to address this. You will hear more about this from my colleagues, so let me provide some basic housekeeping information before moving on to our introductory speakers. To mention that the media briefing consists of 3 parts: a 10-minute introduction, followed by testimonials from community members, which includes a Q&A session, which will run for approximately 30 minutes. That would then be followed by an address from General Holomisa, leader of the UDM, who would like to share his thoughts on the water access crisis. In the third part of the briefing, we will hear from attorneys who are working to serve communities through legal interventions. This will be a 15-minute session, including a Q&A. I also want to mention that this is a public gathering and so will be recorded. It's also being live streamed, as I've mentioned, and you can find that on the Facebook page for Afisas Koplan. The recording will also be made available after this event and a link shared on social media. Erna Curry from the Environmental Monitoring Group will be moderating the chat and will flag questions for us to answer either during the briefing or directly afterwards. Please can I ask that you all use the chat function as opposed to the Q&A, so we're able to track those questions quite easily. We'll ensure that your audio and video is switched on to ask questions during the Q&A. And to also say that all those on the various panels will be available for interviews after the briefing. If you've not received the media pack with the videos, photos, and supporting information, please do also let me know. Let me hand over to Nontando Ngamlana. She's the Executive Director at Afisas Koplan. A brief bio for Nontando appears in the chat. I'll hand over to you, Nontando.
Thank you very much, Leanne, and ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, members of the public, our colleagues in civil society, government officials on the platform today, we greet you this afternoon. Nontando Ngamlana is my name and my profile's on the chat, as Leanne has already said, so I'm not going to even go into that in detail. Afisas Koplan is based in East London, and in the room with me are our panelists who are going to be presented to you just now. So by way of introduction, I think at this point in time we all realize that the depth of the water crisis runs far deeper than some of us have been willing to acknowledge or have even known. And some of us have been working to shine a spotlight in this crisis for some time now. We are of the opinion and argue that the state of affairs that we now find ourselves in has been an engineered crisis, in the sense that the drought patterns and climate change conditions have been forecasted for a while, and we had never seen, or there hadn't been any responsive plans from government to, one, either deal with it or address it in meaningful ways. So much so that as we speak, the communities that have not accessed clean drinking water for years. Abantu Bakutendane, for example, have gone without water for many years. In Ngquswa, Limpopo, in the Free State, in the Northern Cape, and lately we've come to learn that in Nelson Mandela Bay, and not so long ago, it was Cape Town. And so what was initially thought of as a localized problem has now become a nationwide problem. And even though we are where we're at, we still aren't seeing a response or a sustainable or response mechanism from government to address the challenge that we're grappling with. We're in the room today because, one, we want to affirm again that access to clean water is a human right. We want to affirm again that it is untenable that now, where we're at in our democracy, that we still have villages, urban communities, farming communities that are going without access to clean access to water. We also are standing as a collection or as a network of various civil society organizations, activists, social justice movements, and public interest law entities, saying we are connecting, we're connected and mobilized to engage government and to support the communities that are going without water to, one, claim their right, defend that right, and access clean drinking water. And so today, we stand as a collective, we stand in support of and you stand with the communities that are in the room, that are on the platform, that are experiencing the crisis far more than most of you or most of us are, and we're standing with them in demand of access to clean drinking water. We understand that in the shortest term, our ask and our call is for access to clean drinking water in the shortest term. We are asking now, as government is revising its budget in response to COVID-19, that in that process, revise your budget to respond to the crisis and the need for accessibility of clean drinking water. That's the short-term ask. Long-term ask is sustainable planning that responds to the drought crisis and the failing infrastructure in sustainable and long-term ways. Innovate around it so that we do not find ourselves where we are 10 years from now. I invite you to join us in this conversation and to embark with us on this journey. We are going to share with you the strategies that we are embarking upon to realize our dream and to realize our ask. With those few words, welcome, and I really do invite you to join with us on this journey. Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you, Nontando. I'm going to now ask Samson Mokoena from the Vaal Environmental Justice Alliance. Samson's bio will also be posted onto the chat.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, everybody, for joining this important session this afternoon. I represent the Vaal Environmental Justice Alliance, but also a member of South African Water Caucus National CC. Briefly, the colleagues of the South African Water Caucus, we are a voluntary or a loose network. Yeah, Batuba Consent Committee, South Africa. About 2002, Aneri Kopaniko World Summit on Sustainable Development. Lebakabaka Nelu engage Jalim Muso Katabayore, how we to defend the rights of Ronazamiti to make sure the citizens of South Africa are the affected issue in around 2002. Water privatization, especially more city of Johannesburg. The NGOs, the researchers South Africa, really who establish South African Water Caucus. Since then, only the project, the campaign, South African Water Caucus, involved with One, ke ho engage le mmuso, especially ka issue tsa policy. Re bile involved ka National Water Resource Strategy 1 and Water Resource Strategy 2. Ra ba involved ka issue ya well commissioning dams, especially re shebile baahi ba ileng ba tloswa during apartheid, how no develop the big dams, especially in KZN. Ra ba involved haholo ka issue ya water access. Ra ba involved on Masibambane intervention project. South African Water Caucus is organized in about 8 provinces. Currently, the project is really involved, or campaign that is been involved in. Mpumalanga re shebile the issue ya plantations, especially ku Lower Veld, where the plantations, the inkameti amangata and communities, they end up at this nameti. And that campaign has been led by Geosphere. In Gauteng, we've been looking issue of water quality, water access. And then go Western Cape, we know issue of the smart meters around Western Cape. It's affected by Twabangata. So South African Water Caucus has been involved to make sure that the issue of the water cut-offs and smart meters are affected. And we've been also involved in Eastern Cape issue water and people who work around small scale and all of those things. So yes, it's an oldest water movement in South Africa, and we are still involved in defending the issues of water justice, water rights, to make sure everybody unali and access or dignified sanitation, and to make sure Melau policy talks to the poor of the poorest. Briefly, the South African Water Caucus, the work that we've been doing for the last 15 to 20 years to make sure that there's an access, there's a water justice, we defend water rights, big corporations that want to privatize our water resources, your likes of Nestle, Sasol, Eskom, that there is water for the poor of the poorest, and that water arrives at their taps, and they've got a proper, dignified sanitation, and that generally the policy talks to them. We've been engaging in parliamentary discussions, policy, lobbying, and advocacy, media campaign, and legal strategy. Brief is that work that we've been doing in South African Water Caucus for the last 20 years. Thank you very much, Leah.
Thank you so much, Samson. So having heard those introductory comments and having a bit of a context in relation to the work that is being done, I'd like to move over to Boisile Mafilika, who will be speaking to us about his experience in relation to water access. Boisile is a project officer at Masifundise Development Trust, and his bio is in the chat. Boisile, over to you.
Thanks, Leanne. Yes, I'm Boisile Mafilika from Masifundise. I am based in Cape Town. Masifundise works with small-scale fisheries, but on this case, we are more involved because of the fact that around March this year, 10 community members were arrested for having a meeting. And then their meeting was purely on the call made by World Health Organization that people must wash their hands. And then here they are, they don't have even the drinking water. And then for them to have water to wash their hands, it meant that they have to sit down as community members, so they were arrested. Now, we were called to assist in order for them to be released. And then as Masifundise, what we did after the case was dropped, we made it so that we're not going to put it down to say that now that they are released, but we need to make sure that at least we understand why there is a problem in that area of Trentane. And then we were told that out of 9 villages in Trentane under Ward 28, they have water tanks which are dry, they have water taps which are dry. And then we sat down with some officials from the 2 different municipalities, which is your district, Amatole, and your local, Unnuma. And then we started to engage them as officials, just to get to know exactly what is happening there. They gave us a clear picture. And then what we did, we took what they were telling us. We consulted with the community members to find out what is the problem in Tsentane. We were so shocked. We were so shocked to learn that everything which was said by the officials was not true. And then worse of it, the person whom we were given by the officials as a person of which who is representing the community, having engaged him over the telephone, he confessed that, look, I am just here in Tsentane as a municipal worker. I am just reporting on their behalf because of what I was told by the seniors to do. That was the first thing that we discovered, that so many of the reports provided by the officials are not the reflection of what's happening on the ground. And then also, what we did as Masifundise was to follow up with some pictures that were provided by the officials. There were pictures around April this year, where officials were claiming that what we are saying, that there is no water, we were saying the information was not correct. They took pictures somewhere in other villages, and then in their reports, they reported that these pictures were from Kwanombanjana, which is in 128 in Tsentane. We consulted the chief there. He denied, or he objected to those pictures, to say that they are not from his village. And then 2-3 weeks back, we came from Cape Town. We went to Nombanjana, to Lato, to Nizela, to Mazepa, and many other villages. There you could see, and then it's so painful when you see old people drinking dirty, smelly water with animals. You could not take it for an hour moving around and listening to what people are telling you, while there are officials of which who are giving false information to say that everything is well in Tsentane, it's well in Nombanjana. So that is the problem that we face with in Tsentane. Worse of it, if you go to the Eastern Cape, especially in the former Transkei, where you will have so many people of which who are depending on social grants, and then for these very same people of which who are the beneficiaries of SASSA, for them to spend the very same amount of money, which is so little, for them to go and buy their own water tanks. A water tank is almost 2,000 rand. To transport a water tank between town and the village, it's 500 rands. To have someone putting up a platform for a water tank, it's costing different amounts. It's 500 or more. So it means that whoever is getting a salary, or not salary, whoever is getting a social grant, it means his or SASSA pay amount on a monthly basis is going to be spent only on water. And then you ask a question, how much money is spent on a monthly basis when one wants to get water from the river? Even the rivers are dry. From the river to the tank, you will be told that a tractor is costing 700 rands. That one, it's so cheap. But if you go and see why it is so cheap to have a tank of 700 rands, I am telling you, you will not drink that water, because that's where you will get all these dirty things flowing to this river, and then you will get that at 700 rands. And then if you want much more better water, you have to go deep down your own pocket. You must be prepared to pay close to 2,000 rands to hire just a tractor. So that is where we came in as Masfundi to say, look, we need not only to accept the information or the report from the officials, but we need to do the follow-up. Take the information, compare it to what is happening on the ground, and then you will find that if you are to rely mostly to the officials, you will be missing the point. Lastly, what hurts me more around this issue of the water crisis, especially in Tanzania, Masifundise went on to speak to different NGOs asking for the donation of the water tanks. In August, the 14th of August, we were given 6 tanks on condition that these tanks will be transported between King Williamstown and Tentani. And then these tanks, the local municipality, they must take a responsibility to refill them when they are empty. And then the ward councillor must also write a letter to say that he or she is taking a responsibility of looking after the tanks. That was in August the 14th. I communicated that message with Utata Ubalfo. I communicated that information with Utata Undungu from the municipality. Up until this day, the tanks are still sitting in King Williamstown. When you make a follow-up with the officials, because here you are trying your level best to assist, bringing an extra tanks, they don't care. If they were caring enough, those tanks should be by now be in Tentane, but they are still sitting here in King Williamstown. So it means that the officials or the government, they only listen to what people are saying, but they don't show the hand of implementation. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Boisile. You know, I think it's oftentimes that when civil society presents information to any of the state actors that they don't necessarily take our word for it, but you know, here we have community members also being able to tell us what the experience has been. I want to hand over now to Tata Unchoko, who will be sharing the experience as a community leader in the village of Nambanjana. And more information about Tata Unchoko is on the chat. Thank you.
Ndinguhamba Nshoko wakutendana kuNombanjana wa-28 phaya inkungu yile seyiqele nguBoyisile amanzi safakela impompo ngo-2008 aphuma amanzi ngelo xesha kodwa zikhona indawo since afakwa ezampompo ezingazange zaphuma amanzi zabekwa nje 2018 aqalisa ke ngokwendaba ephuma kuzo angaphuma amanzi total uthi mawusolekele ngumuntu uhambe uyocela amanzi kumasipala akunike and then ngokuye yaphela yonke loo nto wathi akho nto izokuzisa amanzi kulaa ndawo yethu kwenzekile ke ngoku ngexesha kunganento le-COVID-19 sabona uba heyi ngoku kuthiwa masibe clean sihlambe izandla sifumane namatange siwabona amatange ezindabeni xa uvela iindaba zika-TV amatange ayasiwa kwiindawo ngeendawo kuthiwa ke sabona masidibaneni ke thina zinkokeli ke sithethe ngalamanzi plus nezi-food parcel kuthethwa ngazo plus namatange angeziyo sibanjwe apho ke kulapho soncedwa khona ke ngumasifundise emveni koko sithethisene ke nomasipala sisiya kumasipala waseNquma umasipala waseNquma asithumele kwimathole siye kumathole athi umathole konakela upipe ngaphantsi usezobalungisa saqalana naloo nto ke ngoku sade sathenga ke ngoku amanzi athathwe emlanjeni amdaka kulapho ke ngoku sizocela uncedo khona nakwezinye iindawo uba sifumane amanzi kangangubana ngoku sithi abantu bakuthi baye benothakazelo kovela le NGO iphethwe ngusisi lo okokuba izobona uba kunjani kulaa ndawo sikuyo amanzi asinawo usisi ophethe uMathole uthi xa ndithetha naye kwi-True FM uthi amanzi engaphumi nje phaya kungenxa yokuba konakele iziseko apha ngaphantsi. Ethetha into ongazange ayibone naye ngoba zange aye phaa kwaNomphandana. Akonakalanga siseko phaa kwaNomphandana ngaphantsi. Into enako akuphumi manzi ewa-28. Abantu bakhona basentlungwini. Kangangokuba ngoJuni losuka kuye siye sabhalela uMinister uSisulu singu-Coastal Links okuba makajonge le nto. UMinister Sisulu uye wandithumela enye intombazane lapha eBhisho yathi izayijonga loo nto leyo. Unangoku ayikayijongi. Saphinda sasa incwadi singu-Coastal Links kwiPremier uMabuyane. Kulapho sifumane khona intoleni i-PA yakhe ethe yona izayilandelela le nto kodwa ngenxa yeCovid izawuphinda ibuye. Unangoku ayikabuyi. Asazi asijonge phi na. Amatanki uthi sisi lo waseMathole amatanki awathumele kuCendane ayi-70 kodwa itanki eliye phaa amatanki aye kwaNomphandana ayi-20 ayi-2. Ucinge ke ilali xa inonikwa amatanki amabini nalo matanki sithetha ngawo a-empty akho manzi agalwa kakanye emveni koko zangaphinda galele. Sinalo ngxaki esijongene nayo. Amanzi asinawo. Sifuna amanzi. Awungabe senza ntoni. Sifuna nje uncedo basifumane amanzi sikwazi basiphile nathi. Nangokuba besingafile COVID zintsikelelo zikaThixo nje ngekudala safayo phaa ngoba zange sibone kwamasipalathi ozosixelela uba utheni uqhuba ntoni. Zange sibone ne-ward councillor, zange sibone ne-ward committee, umnyama nje phaa kuthi. Kungona kuzoqala ukufika ngomso, kungona kuzawuyispika ngenxa yoba kungenelele inkosi kwangenelela nale NGO lesikasisi lo. Kwaqala ubapha inkosi, kwaqala nomasipala amantothuka khona ngoku. Ndingawuxelela izolo ndibe kusokophuka amanzi, kophuka iseko ngamanzi. Kodwa izolo ngeke uzofika umasipala kusasa amanzi aphume ezitephini amanzi. Aphume only 2 hours aphela nawo loo manzi lawo. Ngenxa yokuthi uzofika uspika kusasa. Asiyazi into ezenziwa ngurhulumente wethu ixela uba akasihoyanga sibetha thina abantu basezilalini. Siphila kabuhlungu qithi. Enkosi.
Thank you so much, Tato Nchoko. I'd like now to move on to Sis Atini, who is a project manager at Umtapo, at the Umtapo Social Center in Pedi in the Eastern Cape. Sis Atini.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Atini Mumza. I am from Ngoshwa, under Ngoshwa Municipality in Amathole, but better known as Pedi. I would like to first thank everyone for this opportunity, because I think a pandemic that is bigger than gender-based violence, that is bigger than COVID, is the pandemic of having no water in our villages. Ngoshwa consists of over 130 villages, and those villages are divided into 12 community wards with over 12 councillors, and under Ngoshwa Municipality, of course, and water supply is being rendered by Amathole. In Pedi, we have over 100 villages with no running water. The community members depend on, we have a population of about 90% or plus community members who are unemployed, who depend on social grant and children's grant. These community members have a debt every month because they have to pay people to transport water from dams to their homesteads. We come from a community where the municipality does not offer any services in terms of supplying the community with the temporary solution that Amathole says is available for the community members. Basically, as Umtapo, we were roped in, and okay, I'm born in Pedi, so Umtapo basically came in fighting gender-based violence and also being an anti-corruption organization that was working in Pedi. But in doing so, under the anti-corruption campaign, we found that there's a challenge of villages having no water. What we did was we set up a campaign called Fixing Ingqosha Yethu, where we focused on identifying the villages that had no water and trying to find solution and forming a relationship between the community members, community leaders, and the amatole and management structures of people who are responsible in water supply. In doing so, we wrote letters from the ward committee to the Premier's office and Premier Mabuyane's office, and he personally responded. We bombarded his social media page trying to get a response. We wrote to his PA, we wrote to the President's office where a lady by the name Michelle Lowe responded. But in all these responses and letters that we've been identifying and requesting that they intervene in the water issue, more especially during this COVID-19 time, when the precautions that are set is that you wear your mask, you wash your hands frequently. We felt insulted. We felt that as people of the villages, we are left to die because we drink in our, like the previous speaker said, we drink in filthy dams. Where the Amatole district, when they came to taste the waters, because we said to them, okay, if you say you don't have water, here is Ngwekazi Dam. Pull the water from Ngwekazi Dam and give it to our people. They tested the water and said the water that is in Ngwekazi Dam is not even fit enough to be drank by animals. Yeah. But we, on a daily basis, take treatment with those water, and are expected to sanitize. So during this COVID-19, we were stressing because the infection rate in Eastern Cape was quite high of COVID-19. So we were pushing everywhere we can, writing to whoever, or even trying to get some of the Chapter 9 institutions to step in because water is a need to survive. But nevertheless, after failed attempts of the community, we decided to take it to the streets. We planned a peaceful march to send a letter personally to the mayor's office. We were shot at in the N2 road in between Pedi and King Williamstown. When the police arrived in Pedi, they were from Bisho and Umtata. They didn't even question because we were not even on the road. We were still standing, gathering each other, trying to walk peacefully towards where we were going to. We were going to send a letter to Amatore in the Pedi office. We were going to send a letter to the municipality. We were shot at and our people were arrested. But due to communication, because in this country, if you do not have the contact number of someone who's somebody, if you are not fluent in English, if you do not come from a background, if you come from a background of privilege and opportunity, then your voice is heard. But if you are a village person and you know no one, and you follow the basic processes of writing to your ward committee, you write to the councillor, and you follow normal procedure, your voice is not heard. So opportunities like this, as much as we do not have much time to express, we need to pressure everything in minutes due to restrictions. The water issue, if government is saying that besides the COVID-19 issue, if government is saying and putting up posters, like I'm looking on the one that says wash your hands, how are we expected to wash hands during this COVID-19 time? Well, how are we expected to drink our treatment? How are we expected to decontaminate? Because the fight of water I paid, it's been over 10 years. If the water issue in our villages is highly influenced by corruption, because if you follow the funds, we requested funds from the Amatole to say the millions that were given to you, you should be developing the water system. I loved when I walked in and Sis Nondando was saying, talking about long and short term goals. Talking about long and short term goals. The issue is that the Amatole, we are requesting that the president gives the Amatole a budget where they can improve our water system, where we can recycle and reuse our own water. And we are requesting immediate temporary solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sis Atini. We don't really need to kind of say much more than that. Thank you for sharing that. I want to hand over to Sis Mentane. Sis Mentane, as you come forward there, she's a 62-year-old mother of 2 children, a grandmother to 6, and a water rights activist with a deep love for her community. Sis Mentane, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. as she has already introduced me, I'm from Ngako A, that is in Trentane. It's part of Ward 28, sub-Ward 28. We have got a problem, as the previous speakers have already said, that we have got a problem of water. Since 2018, the 25th of June, we don't have water. It only came on the, I think on the 12th to the 14th of May this year. After that, there's still no water. We've got a problem. We don't get good responses from the people who are leading us. That is the councillors and the chiefs. When we report the water, the problem of the water, they tell us about the machine that has been broken long ago, and also the dam. Sometimes the dam is dirty. That dam is dirty. It needs to be clean. And also the third one is the drought. Can't you see, Mendani, that there's drought? Okay, if there's drought, please help us. Do something. Yes, I can do something, but you can also remove us if you're not doing the good thing. That is their response of the ward councillor and sometimes the ward committee. And then now, what happened? For the ward, the ward councillor is sick, but there's a PR that has been deployed there. She has always got a very bad negative attitude, but she only responded when she heard that the executive of NAD was there, and also the Masifundis and the Coastal Link people. Then it's only they responded positive that they will come and see. Otherwise, there's no water. The tanks, some of the taps are broken, and there's no water that is coming out. We are fetching the water from the rivers, and we hire those the tractors that cost us 800 rand. And it depends to the 800 rand for 2,500 liters. If you want 5,000 liters, it's times 2 to that. Imagine we are pensioners and we don't have enough money to pay those tractors, but we have to, but because it's not easy to go to the river. What we need is just water. We need help. We need to be assisted about the water, because we cannot move forward for our lives if we don't have enough water. In fact, we don't even have water. Even 2 or 3 days back, there was rain. We are all happy that at least there's a drop that is coming in. So we have to look at, we have to wait for the rain. But what about the municipality? They don't even come down. The councillors, they don't even come down. And also, when we were arrested on the 10th of April, because we had a meeting as the community leaders, we wanted to find out how to get those tanks from the minister, because we saw them on the TV. Is then the police came and they arrested us, and we were fined 10,000 rand per person. Imagine 10,000 rand. Who are we to be charged 10,000 rand per person? And the minister, who was also charged for this COVID-19, was only charged 1,000 rand. And the poor people from the villages were charged 10,000 rand, and we were 10. This is what is happening. I don't know when I'm going to get, but since this Masifundis and also this NGO came, at least we do have a hope that we are going to get the assistance. And also the executive of NADU was also there in that meeting 2 weeks back. So really, we have got a problem. We are in need of water. Thank you very much.
I'll just ask Anne not to come forward for the question, please, Leanne.
Okay. Anne?
Hello?
Hi, Anne. Yes,
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, in the same way that there's femicide, you know, I'm asking whether they would describe the lack of access to clean water as hydrocide. In other words, a crime against water management, water access. I don't know how better. I suppose we have to come to a definition of hydrocide. What is hydrocide?
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. Can we have 1 or 2 more questions before Atini responds? And perhaps General Holomisa, you can also come in with your address. I think you're on mute.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Welcome. And thank you for joining us.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. Thank you to our host for the kind invitation to come and join you this afternoon. Utata lo osuka kuCendane nabakuCendane uSisilerato enisebenza naye apho contacted me on Monday, inviting me to come and share some thoughts with you today. But she gave me a background of what a problem in various provinces. But in particular, kuCendane, apho esithi akho. I immediately phoned uLindwe Sisulu minister, and athi kuye Sisilindi nazi ingxaki. And she immediately came back to us within 10 minutes. Esithi uzawuthumela abantu i-task team yakhe. I suspect therefore ukuthi le nto engathi iyaqhubeleka apha kuzawuzomeya nontoni nebhisho kuzozanywa nje uba kube khona into ekhoyo, but ufuna nivula amehlo nani kwelo cala. It's unfortunate ukuthi i-government even i-budget seyikhuphile iyatyiwa le mali njengoba benibonile nase-OR Tambo apho bekufama kufakwe amanzi eMqanduli naseMthatha ezilalini kuyoma ngeCoffee Bay. Lo mali leyo sithetha nje bayinikwa abantu but abakafaki manzi kulaa ndawo. My work with the Champions of Environment Foundation, my personal relationship, if you will, with water has had a lot to do with its criticality in terms of environmental preservation. For instance, many of the projects that the Champions undertaken over the years were around establishing indigenous forests and cultivating fruit orchards in rural areas. Of course, with sustainable water resources, these projects would have been doomed to failure, and we would be wasting our money and efforts. It's simple as that. From the perspective of my work with the UDM, water and access to it also takes on a socio-economic dynamic where it is a human right, a constitutional imperative, and a service delivery issue, especially at local government level, where this competence resides. I sometimes think that many ordinary South Africans do not really understand how precious water in this country is, aside from some urbanites who feel inconvenienced when there are water restrictions. For some, it is a question of buying another bottle of water and tossing the plastic bottle away, not understanding the impact of that simple act on hygiene in terms of waste management, as well as the impact on the overall environment. However, for others, access to water is a daily struggle that involves, in the worst cases, competing with animals to find even the dirtiest drop, or for the luckier ones, pushing wheelbarrows for long distances to fill containers at the one pump in the village. This massive gap between the haves and the have-nots is frightening, and what is worse is that this is unfortunately not a new problem. To give you an example of the work I do, we recently confronted a case where a councillor in KwaZulu-Natal, at Msinga, who said he bought water from government, had it delivered to his house, in an enormous government water tanker. What is, however, most sickening about this situation is the fact that this councillor serves a community where there is absolutely no running water. How this public servant reconciles his actions with his chosen profession, I certainly do not understand. In certain aspects, progress has been made since 1994, but the backlogs and imbalances of the past have not been addressed. Almost no new water infrastructure development has taken place to cater for an increased demand on an increasingly scarcer resources. Instead, far too much of our existing water infrastructure have not been maintained, from fixing the simplest things like leaking pipes that supply water to a village or a township, to massive stormwater drainage pipes. Vast quantities of water running through the rivers of the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal ends up unused in the sea. So we have an available resource that we can utilize responsibly. Looking to the future, and given the vagaries of climate change and the impact of desertification, there is also a clear need to increase South Africa's current water storage and dam capacity, because supplying water to people's home becomes immaterial if we do not have a massive supply available at any given time. We could also, as a long-term strategy, look at importing water from water-rich African countries like Nigeria, Congo, and Cameroon, and have it shipped in along the coastline. From our ports, separate water pipes could be built to pump water to the dams and reservoirs in our thirstiest provinces. Water infrastructure development must, however, be prioritized, and large investment is required, and it will have several significant benefits. Another simple tool that government can use to better manage the little water we have, and in the process create jobs, is generating projects that address the silting up of rivers and dams, as well as the removal of alien vegetation. In conclusion, civil society organizations must bring to action when infrastructure development projects happen in our communities. And we must help our people in checking that the work is complete and is of good quality. There is a need for us to educate our people about the scarcity of water in South Africa. And although climate change and environmental protection can be complex subjects for people to understand, there is not enough understanding around why we should be using water in a responsible manner. So, mababa basekutandane nabantu base Eastern Cape kufuneka ngathi sinyusa igaws, because the money esinikwayo national government, I think we are one province which is leading in terms of corruption. So it's high time that we should put our foot down and say, this province, which produced leaders who led the struggle in this country, deserve to be treated better, even if it means that this province of Eastern Cape, must be under administration. So be it, as long as the people of that region will benefit and goes.
Thank you, General Holomisa. Community members may have some questions for you, so we do hope that you stay on the call.
Yes.
Meanwhile, can I ask Susan Comrie and Estelle Ellis to please also ask their questions, and all answers will be done in one go. Thank you.
Hi, this is Susan Comrie from the Amabongane Center for Investigative Journalism. I hope you can hear me. The connection's not great on my side.
We can hear you. It's a little bit patchy, Susan, but we can hear you.
Great. So my question is basically how can we make sure that the media has more kind of direct contact with activists on the ground, community activists, so that we are more aware of the problems that are happening in the Eastern Cape? What would, I mean, my question is also sort of what would make people, what would work for people, what would work for the community activists as a way for us to have more direct contact with you?
Okay, thanks, Susan. Estelle, and then we'll go to the answers and move on to the next session. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. I just wanted to know, we're very concerned about all these reports that people, especially elderly people and people who might be vulnerable to infections, are drinking water that has not been treated and that they are taking dirty water from the river. So I wanted to ask the activists, have they seen maybe people with tummy problems, or have they heard stories of people getting sick because of the water that they are drinking? Or if they do have a plan, you know, how do they sanitize their water to make sure that it's safe?
Okay, I'll hand over to the team that's based at FESIS, and they can answer the questions. I think they have them covered.
Okay, I'll share answering with my comrade. What can you pull up the question again? Sorry. But basically, I think what needs to happen, more especially now that there are people on the ground working and fighting for them to trying to break the silence in the water issue, is that we need to form a relationship in terms of keeping constant contact. For example, in Pedi, we have over 67 villages and we have WhatsApp groups where we constantly keep communication with and updates as to what are they doing and what are they doing towards trying to restore or trying to get water back into their villages. Maybe if we can keep, I think the best thing, there's no need to even elaborate, we need to keep communication and we need to have direct contact or a group or a structure where we are able to sit and the villages be represented, where you get the stories directly from the community members as to this is the milestone we've worked on and this is what has happened. Because I believe that every time the issue of water is publicized, then they do something about it. Like Ubabu Boisile said, when after the march they were arrested and it was in the media, the water was opened in one of their villages. Same thing applied to Pedi. After the riot and the media covered the story, water was available in Kwanolumba, which hadn't received water in over 15 years. We had been buying water from government. So to even what Utabi Wolomisa is saying is that we are facing that situation where we are being sold water, but how can we prove that when we have a community that is not conscious? The community members are not conscious that what is happening is wrong. Them being sold a 20-liter packet for 50 rand, they think it's the right thing to do. The same way as a rape victim. A rape victim might not know that it is rape because the person is married to this person, but when you conscientize them and you show them that this is not what's supposed to be happening, you shouldn't be buying water for 1.5 for a tank to be filled, which is the government water. So we need to form a relationship and a structure where we keep constant communication so we can continuously update you.
I want to respond to the question that was asked, that the question that asks why is government not providing water when it actually is a constitutional prerogative, right? And there's two things to it. The first one is government was sleeping in the steering wheel in the years when they had done the first prediction of the rainfall patterns and the drought patterns, and the predictions were made and reports were produced. And this was 15 years ago. There are studies that have looked at the water infrastructure in the Transkei in particular that date back 20 years ago. If we have access to those studies, Surely government should have seen them and sat on them for so long. So now we're finding ourselves where we are because they didn't do anything about it at the time when they needed to. So there wasn't proactive fixing of infrastructure to respond, and even to respond to population growth patterns, right? But now that is compounded with poor governance, lack of skills, corruption. We have examples here in Muma where huge tenders that are running into hundreds of millions have been awarded without the proper procurement processes being followed. And so even when you have money and we can respond in the shortest term to address the needs of the people, but nefarious activities are creeping in. And so there are structural underlying water shortage, drought, climate changes issues to be dealt with. But it is not as though we didn't know. Someone was sleeping when they should have been doing something about it.
Thina phaya kangabalelwa yamandla ngekhoyo sinomama beothe bovuke enaze kwagqirha ngenxa yohambisa sisisu samandla mdaka ithethe ukuthi ke urhulumente lo wethu akasihoyanga kakuhle nakasana kangoba mhlawumbe nangoku zikhona into ebesinozithetha ezenziwa ngurhulumente esinyanzela ngazo lento le-corruption njengasifuna ezo zinto ngoku ngoba sawusithetha ecaleni kakuhle shuthi ke sinengxaki enkulu phaa ngenxa yorhulumente kangela umzekelo ngoku uminister uSisulu ubhalelwe nguJune ubhalela ndifowunela ngusisi lwabebhisho othi uyeza kwanombandla akekezi nangoku akho nto incedisayo kuloo nto abantu bayagula bayafa utya amanzi aluhlaza yabona ugcwele izinto ezifileyo phaa kuloo mfundo kodwa sinorhulumente nomasipala wethu oqhubekayo ebhatala abantu bamanzi bakhona abantu bayelalini kuthiwa ziikomiti zamanzi ziyabhatala kodwa akho manzi aphumayo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for those answers. General Holomisa, I see that you have your hand up. Yeah, please go ahead. We'll move on to the legal organizations presenting their strategies.
What I would suggest you do, together with other NGOs perhaps, is that we need to compile a report and target this noise I'm hearing recently from the president that there's going to be a massive investment on infrastructure. It's high time that the rural areas must be given a bigger cake in that development. Water being one of those. So I'm prepared to assist to make sure that that report reaches the office of the president and the Minister of Water Affairs. And we should do that as soon as possible so that when they begin to allocate funds for infrastructure, if they will ever do so, but they seem to be making good noises these days. But let's forward the documentation and motivate that. We cannot wait for Umzimvubu Dam, which they have been promising it for the last 15, 20 years. We have Butterworth, which has no water as we speak. We have Grahamstown problems and so many Clantanes and many villages, and also in other provinces, of course. But I think if we can coordinate our efforts and make sure that this attention is escalated to the highest level, I'm sure Cyril will assist, I hope. But the key is that we should depoliticize this project as much as possible. I would like to view in future, when you have a session like this, you invite a minister from the ruling party or a mayor, so that they must know that if there is a pipe which has burst it is not best only for NGOs or for a certain political party, but for all the communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, General Holomisa. I think that is such a practical step that you have suggested, and we will certainly, I mean, there are 14 organizations represented here today. We will certainly compile that information. We will send that on to you, and we would really appreciate your intervention in respect of urgency around over 100 communities across South Africa who are facing these challenges. I know that there are other questions, really important questions, but I want you to know that Erna has noted down the questions and the comments and will be liaising with you after the briefing to get some answers. We really do need to move on to the legal NGOs who are participating today and who will be presenting on why we have come together as attorneys in various legal organizations to be able to address this issue. I want to hand over to Shatira Hassim. She's from the Legal Resources Center, who will present on behalf of the Center for Environmental Rights, the Center for Applied Legal Studies, and the Pro Bono Department at Weber Wenzel. Her bio will appear in the chat, after which the various legal representatives that are present here will be available for questions. Over to you, Shatira.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Leanne. Good afternoon to the members of the public, my colleagues, the panelists, and the Honorable Mr. Holomisa. I'm Shatira Hassim, and from the Legal Resources Center, as we're fondly known as the LRC, we have always been committed to address the water crisis and issues with the government. The Legal Resources Center, CALS, and CAR have always litigated in the past to highlight these difficulties faced by the communities. Again, listening to those stories mentioned by the community members just again highlights the continued struggle. So we have litigated successfully in the past, but as you can all see and hear, the struggle continues. Today, the Legal Resources Center, CER and CALS, together with Weber Wenzel attorneys, have joined forces to strategize various litigation methods and various avenues to get the government to accept this crisis and that it's imminent, that they have to react and have to deliver. The pandemic, unfortunately, just highlighted the crisis, which is more difficult, accompanied by the drought that we're all facing in South Africa. Climate change is moving the goalposts constantly, so the drought only exacerbates access to clean drinking water. Recently, the LRC and our client COPAC have engaged with various municipalities in the Eastern Cape and in Limpopo as well. And fortunately or surprisingly, as recent as this morning, the Eastern Cape government have spoken further with us with regards to what they would like to achieve with this water crisis. But again, as we've discussed in various meetings, we don't only want to have meetings. We want action by the government. We want them to act and go beyond meeting and discussions with all of us. We are hoping that the government in the Eastern Cape will take the matter further with us, and in weeks to come, we will be sitting down with them also. But again, we want action, and not action only with access to water, access to clean drinking water that's accessible to communities. Our goal is not to simply just resort to litigation, but we welcome government to engage with us so that we can fast track this crucial crisis faced by communities. My question to government today would be, do we continue to listen to these tragic stories, or are they willing to act and give us results? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shatira. I think this is such an important moment with so many NGOs who have worked on this to come together in this way. I want to check in with colleagues from the Center for Applied Legal Studies, as well as from Weber Wenzel, if they'd like to make any brief additional comments while we wait for questions to come through on our chat. Ariella, I see you would like to. Please go ahead. Ariella is from the Center for Applied Legal Studies.
Thanks, Leanne, and thanks, Shatira, and everyone else who's spoken already. I just, from the Center for Applied Legal Studies side, wanted, and also having spoken to our colleagues in the other legal NGOs and also our partners and client communities, to point out, firstly, which has been said, but to emphasize it, we've been really lucky today to hear from community activists and community members from the Eastern Cape, but to emphasize that our organizations are seeing this problem across the country. We're a really big country. The entire country is affected by water scarcity, and all of our organizations and our partners are dealing with communities facing similar problems in every one of the 9 provinces. And then also just to highlight something which I have seen in the chat, but is something that we've seen particularly in our client communities, is the gendered effect of a lack of access to water. We know that in particularly rural communities, the burden of taking care of the household largely falls on women. And so something like water would then only further burden them. Women have to get up early in the morning to go get water from whatever water source there might be, often before dawn, so that because they're competing for access to water with the animals. This makes these women incredibly vulnerable. It can often be dangerous. They might have to walk quite far to access this water. So it only increases the domestic burden of women. It also, when we think about lack of access to water in our communities across the country, we must think both of the home, but also of social institutions. So if a community doesn't have water, the school also doesn't have water. So it means that school children either go to school without water, knowing that this is something they're going to have to face the whole day, or often school children have to miss classes during the course of the day so that they can go collect water. Again, unfortunately, this burden often falls to girl children. And I think that that's something that we need to bear in mind when we're discussing this complete lack of access to water across the country.
Thanks so much, Ariella. I want to see if colleagues at Weber Wenzel would like to come in. I mean, we've heard from Boisile, from our water rights activists, about the disconnect between what government is saying in terms of delivery and what communities are experiencing. So there's clearly a disconnect. As lawyers working in the space, we're saying our first resort is not litigation, but in some instances we're forced to, specifically in the regions where our community activists live. Samantha, any reflections from your side?
Thanks, Leanne. Yeah, and I think that's an important point to highlight, that through COVID, it's only exacerbated and emphasized the lack of water that these communities face, but really they've been facing these problems for years. And some of the communities in the Clentane region haven't had water for 2 years. And as Leanne says, there seems to be a lack of communication, and I know the community activists also brought this up, because infrastructure will sometimes be installed, such as taps or boreholes, but then there's no water coming out of the taps. Similarly with COVID, there were announcements that water tankers were delivered to the district, to the Amatole district municipality. But these communities didn't actually see these water tanks. And if they were delivered, then they weren't filled up with water, or they were filled up once and never again. And so the problem really isn't, the problem is twofold. It's the emergency water during COVID, during this crisis, and it's also a longer or sustainable solution that we have to come up with to make sure that these communities have access to water in the future.
Thanks, Samantha. And I think we have all agreed here that there's a great deal to be done. There's a lot of work to be done. We are grateful for interventions from General Holomisa, from the interventions from the various legal organizations, which are sometimes, unfortunately, necessary in order to kind of effect meaningful change. We want meaningful, urgent change, and I think this is the message that we want to really convey. We have a few minutes left, and I'm aware that there are some additional questions and media inquiries, but those will be followed up after the media briefing. I want to quickly hand over to our team at Ephesus Corplan and hear from them in terms of concluding remarks, and be able to end off the webinar with, yes, we've reflected, how is this a moment for us in terms of moving forward?
All right, so I think by way of concluding, Leanne and team, I mean, first and for all, we are today wanting to stand together just to highlight once more the severity of the challenge that we're dealing with. And I like that we are also bringing to the fore the gendered lens and the manner in which women experience the crisis or the impact on women and girls, right, of a lack of access to water. But also it does seem like such a grave injustice in the context where government constantly talks about rural development and encouraging people to farm, and people must get up and do things for themselves. That when you don't have access to water, you're limited. It's such a crippling crisis in the sense that it's got such a ripple and spiraling effects, right? That limits your creativity and innovation and agency. And absolutely it is a nationwide crisis. And much as it impacts on rural communities so severely, because we're talking about informal communities, informal economies here, who at the slightest shock are crippled. But we appreciate also that the challenge runs deep into urban communities as well, particularly in informal settlements. And so it is a nationwide crisis. And I think part of what we're doing here today is to say to government, at some point we need you to listen. And at some point we need you to co-create meaningful solutions with us. Recognize our voice, recognize our struggle, recognize that we've been resilient for so long. And at this point in time, we are exploring litigation. We are at various stages of exploring litigation as one of the ways that we want to exercise and amplify our voice and bring attention and an amicable solution in the short term to our problem, but also to explore long-term sustainable solutions. And I think we as a collective cannot say that loud enough. And so I think from us, that's what's in our heart, and that's what we're hopeful for. Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you so much, Nontando. There couldn't have been a more powerful ending to this incredible media briefing today. I think the 14 organizations that have come together today in this way to be able to illustrate the strength that we have in our numbers and our commitment is so evident. And it's the beginning of really enhanced coordination. And we hope, or we will take this forward, whether through engagement, through litigation, through the various strategies we use. I want us to just, we are so grateful to the community members who have traveled out such long distances to join us today at the offices for Ephesus Corplan, community members joining us from all over the country today. We haven't been able to hear from everyone, but we will certainly be in touch to make sure that your experience, your individual experience in your own community is shared, is profiled, and that you know you have so many organizations behind you in terms of taking this work forward. Incredibly grateful to all of you for staying on this call for almost an hour and a half, for sharing your experiences, very difficult experiences, and as lawyers representing you, serving you through these processes, we remain committed and we remain available. I think we can end it there. We'll be in touch in terms of those media inquiries that we couldn't get to. Thank you all.